August 7th, 1942. Sussex 28 hours. Lunga Point, Guadalcanal. First Lieutenant Robert Blake pressed his face into the wet sand as a Japanese machine gun opened fire somewhere in the jungle ahead. The bullet snapped through the air 6 inches above his helmet. He was 24 years old. He had been on this island for 9 minutes. He was absolutely certain he was about to die. The machine gun stopped. Blake lifted his head. Around him, 40 Marines from Company A, 1st Marine Engineer Battalion, hugged the ground, waiting. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Sergeant Mike Torres, a 29-year-old mechanic from San Antonio, rose to a crouch and sprinted toward the tree line. Nothing happened. No gunfire. No explosion. Torres waved them forward. False alarm. The gun was abandoned. Blake stood up on shaking legs and followed his men into the jungle. They pushed through thick vegetation, stepping over scattered Japanese equipment. Helmets, rifles, half-eaten bowls of rice still warm to the touch. The enemy had run without a fight. Why? Blake moved faster, following a dirt trail that opened into a clearing. Then he saw it. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. An airfield. A nearly finished airfield stretched across a coastal plain 400 yards wide and over half a mile long. The runway itself ran northwest to southeast, approximately 3,600 feet of packed coral surface, gleaming in the early morning sun. But what made Blake stop and stare, what made his hands start shaking for a completely different reason, were the machines. Sitting abandoned beside the strip were 2 Japanese bulldozers, 4 trucks, 6 generators, 11 road rollers, and enough construction equipment to build a small city. The Japanese had not just abandoned this airfield, they had left everything needed to finish it. Blake grabbed his field radio with trembling fingers. Charlie 6, this is Alpha 2. I have visual on a Japanese airfield. Repeat, enemy airfield. Approximately 80% complete. You need to see this immediately. By 0745 hours, Colonel Frank Goethe stood beside Blake on the edge of the unfinished runway. Goethe was 42 years old, a veteran of World War I, and the intelligence officer for the 1st Marine Division. He pulled out aerial reconnaissance photographs taken 3 weeks earlier and compared them to what lay before him. The Japanese had been constructing this strip since early July. Probably 2,000 construction troops working day and night. They had cleared jungle, graded land, excavated coral, and built the foundation for a major air base. Another 2 weeks and Japanese bombers would be operating from this position, hitting every Allied base within 500 miles. Goethe looked at his watch. Then he looked at the ocean. His face went pale. Blake saw it happen, watched the color drain from his superior officer's face, and felt his stomach drop. "Sir, what is wrong?" Goethe spoke quietly, but his voice carried across the silent men. Intelligence estimates the Japanese fleet will counterattack within 48 to 72 hours. Cruisers, destroyers, troop transports. Our Navy will not stay to fight them, cannot stay without air cover. Once our ships withdraw, every Marine on this island is trapped. No supplies, no reinforcements, no evacuation. The only way we survive is if we finish this runway and get American fighters on the ground before the Japanese fleet arrives. Blake, how long to complete this strip? Blake walked the length of the runway, his boots kicking up fine coral dust. His civil engineering degree from Ohio State had covered roads, bridges, drainage systems. Nothing about building runways on tropical islands under enemy fire with a 72-hour deadline. The Japanese had done solid work. The base layer was compacted coral, the grading was nearly level, the drainage looked adequate. But the surface was rough and uneven. The northern end terminated in solid jungle, and the whole thing was too short. American F-4F Wildcat fighters needed at least 4,000 feet to land safely, preferably 4,500 feet. This strip was 3,600 feet and unfinished. Blake did the math. Properly completing this runway would require 3 to 4 weeks, but they did not have weeks. They had days. Maybe. He turned back to Götke. "Sir, if we work continuously, if we can operate the Japanese equipment, if we ignore every safety standard I learned in engineering school, we might finish a minimum functional strip in 72 hours. It will be dangerous. Pilots will crash. But it is possible." Götke nodded once. "Then make it possible. I will get you every man I can spare." By 0900 hours, Blake had assembled 83 Marines with any construction experience. Farm boys who had driven tractors, carpenters, plumbers, mechanics, men who had poured concrete or graded roads. He split them into 4 teams. Team 1 would clear 500 feet of jungle at the northern end. Team 2 would grade and compact the cleared area. Team 3 would repair the existing runway surface. Team 4 would figure out how to operate Japanese construction equipment that none of them could read. Torres took Team 4. The Japanese bulldozers sat silent and incomprehensible, their control panels labeled entirely in kanji characters. Torres climbed into the operator seat of the first dozer and stared at the controls. There were 6 levers, 3 pedals, 2 gauges, and a dozen switches. He had operated American Caterpillar dozers back in Texas. Those had clear English labels. This was guesswork and prayer. Torres pushed the first lever. Nothing. He pushed the second lever. Nothing. He tried the ignition switch. Nothing. The machine sat dead and useless. He climbed down, circled the dozer, checked the fuel tank. Full. He checked the battery connections. Good. He climbed back up and systematically tried every combination of switches and levers he could find. 30 minutes passed. 40 minutes. Sweat poured down his face in the climbing heat. His hands started shaking with frustration. They had 72 hours to finish an airfield, and he could not start a single machine. Torres slammed his fist into the control panel. Then, in pure desperation, he yanked a small brass lever near the fuel line that he had assumed was a drainage valve. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life, belching black smoke. Torres sat frozen for 3 seconds, too surprised to move. Then he started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that made the other Marines turn and stare. The second dozer started on the first try once they knew which lever to pull. By 1100 hours, both bulldozers were operational, and teams 1 and 2 were attacking the jungle at the north end of the runway. The heat hit like a physical blow. Temperatures climbed past 95 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity so thick it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Private First Class Danny Sullivan, a 19-year-old from Boston, swung a machete at a vine as thick as his forearm. The blade bounced off. He swung again, harder. The vine parted, and something small and fast dropped onto his shoulder. Fire ants, dozens of them. They bit simultaneously, injecting venom that felt like hot needles driven under his skin. Sullivan screamed, dropped the machete, and tore at his shirt, crushing ants that had already spread across his chest and neck. Corpsman Miller ran over, poured water across Sullivan's torso, and brushed off the remaining insects. Sullivan sat in the dirt, gasping, covered in angry red welts. Miller gave him 30 seconds to recover, then sent him back to work. There was no time for anything else. By 1400 hours, they had cleared 150 feet of jungle. Sullivan collapsed. He simply stopped walking, took 2 stumbling steps, and fell face first into the dirt. He did not pass out. He lay there, conscious but unable to move, his body shutting down from heat exhaustion. His core temperature had climbed to 104 degrees. Two Marines dragged him into the shade of a cargo net stretched between trees. Miller poured water over Sullivan's head and chest, trying to cool him down before his brain started cooking. Sullivan vomited twice, bringing up nothing but bile and stomach acid. His eyes rolled back. Miller grabbed his shoulders. "Stay with me, kid. Stay with me." After 5 minutes, Sullivan's eyes focused again. After 10 minutes, he could sit up. After 20 minutes, he was back on his feet, swaying and walking toward the jungle with his machete. Nobody had ordered him to return to work. He just did it, because everyone understood. If they did not finish this runway, they were all dead anyway. By 1800 hours on August 7th, Team 1 had cleared 200 feet of jungle and extended the potential runway length to 3,800 feet. Not enough. Blake pushed them harder. Work through the night. Use vehicle headlights to see. Keep moving. Keep cutting. The men worked in 2-hour shifts, hacking at jungle in the darkness, then collapsing for 2 hours of sleep on the bare ground before returning. Nobody complained. Nobody quit. Fear is a powerful motivator when the alternative is death. At 0130 hours on August 8th, a Japanese flying boat appeared over the island. The 4-engine Kawanishi H-8K circled twice at 8,000 feet, then dropped 6 500-pound bombs. The first bomb hit 200 yards west of the runway, throwing up a fountain of dirt and shredded trees. The second bomb hit the beach. The third, fourth, and fifth bombs scattered randomly across the jungle. The sixth bomb hit Team 1's work area, landing 30 feet from where 8 Marines were clearing brush. The explosion threw Private James Costa into the air like a rag doll. He hit the ground 15 feet away and did not move. Corpsman Miller reached him in 30 seconds. Costa was dead. Shrapnel had opened his chest from sternum to hip. Miller closed Costa's eyes and covered him with a poncho. Then he went back to treating the 3 other men with minor wounds. The work continued. August 8th, 0600 hours. Blake had not slept. None of them had slept. The runway now extended 4,100 feet. Long enough for fighters, barely. But the surface was a disaster. The coral was rough, uneven, pocked with ruts and soft spots that would collapse under the weight of landing aircraft. Blake knew the truth. Any pilot who tried to land on this strip had maybe a 50% chance of walking away, but 50% was better than 0. If they did not finish the runway, the chance was 0 for everyone. Team 3 worked desperately to smooth the strip using the captured Japanese road rollers. The heavy steam-powered machines made pass after pass, compacting the coral inch by inch. But the rollers were crude, designed for rough construction work, not precision finishing. Blake needed something better. At 0730 hours, a Marine found a partially buried cache of pierced steel planking hidden in the jungle 100 yards from the strip. PSP, the interlocking metal plates used to create temporary runways. There were 400 sections, each 10 feet long. Not enough to cover the entire runway, but enough to reinforce the worst sections. Blake ordered teams to lay PSP across the roughest 1,000 feet, creating a patchwork surface of metal and coral. It was improvised, ugly, and possibly lethal, but it was the best they had. By 1500 hours on August 8th, 38 hours after the landing, the runway was functionally complete. Blake radioed division headquarters. "Strip is ready for test. We need an aircraft." At 1620 hours, a single PBY Catalina flying boat circled the field. The pilot, Lieutenant William Sampson, was 31 years old and had logged 1,200 flight hours. He looked down at the runway and felt his stomach tighten. The strip was a nightmare, rough, short, barely marked. Patches of metal planking glinted in the sunlight, indicating soft spots underneath. Samson knew if he misjudged the approach, if the wheels caught a rut, if the landing gear collapsed, he would die and the runway would be blocked for days. But he had his orders. Test the strip. He committed to the approach. Samson brought the Catalina in low and fast, aiming for the very start of the runway to use every available foot. Wheels touched down hard. The aircraft bounced, slammed back to the coral, bounced again. The landing gear screamed in protest. Samson fought the controls as the plane skipped and lurched across the uneven surface. The left wheel hit a soft spot and sank 4 inches. The aircraft pulled violently left. Samson corrected, shoving the rudder pedal to the floor and pouring power to the right engine. The Catalina skidded sideways, spraying coral dust, then straightened. Samson cut power and stood on the brakes. The plane rolled to a stop 3,400 feet down the strip with 700 feet remaining. Samson sat in the cockpit for 10 seconds, breathing hard, his hands locked on the controls. Then he climbed out and walked back along the runway, examining the deep ruts his wheels had carved into the soft sections. Blake met him at the midpoint. Samson looked at him with something between respect and horror. Your strip will kill pilots, maybe half who try to land here, but it will work for the other half. Fix the soft spots, mark the edges, pray. That is all you can do. Blake nodded. We have 48 hours until the Japanese arrive. We keep working. But on August 9th at 01:30 hours, everything changed. Blake was checking the northern end of the runway when he heard thunder. Except it was not thunder. It was coming from the ocean, 20 miles north. He turned and saw flashes on the horizon. Bright white flashes, dozens of them, lighting up the night sky like a distant lightning storm. Naval gunfire. Big guns. A surface battle was happening right now between Allied and Japanese warships. Blake stood frozen, watching the flashes, hearing the delayed booms roll across the water. The battle lasted 32 minutes, then silence. Blake did not know who won, but he knew what it meant. The Japanese fleet was here. By dawn on August 9th, the truth arrived. The Battle of Savo Island had been a catastrophe. Japanese cruisers had ambushed the Allied naval force, sinking 4 cruisers and killing over 1,000 sailors. The surviving Allied ships, badly damaged and outgunned, had withdrawn. Every American transport vessel was gone. Every warship was gone. The Marines on Guadalcanal were alone. The runway was their only hope. At 0900 hours, Blake walked the beach and found the first body. A sailor, maybe 20 years old, wearing the remnants of a U.S. Navy uniform. His life jacket had kept him afloat for miles before he washed ashore. Blake stood over the body and felt something break inside his chest. This sailor had died protecting them, protecting this airfield, this strip of compacted coral and desperation. If Blake failed, if the runway did not work, then this sailor and the 1,000 others died for nothing. Blake turned away from the body and walked back to the airfield. Team leaders gathered around him. Their faces were exhausted, sunburned, streaked with coral dust. Blake looked at each of them. Marine fighters are coming tomorrow. 31 aircraft. If they land safely, we have air cover. If they crash, we have nothing. We work until it is done. They worked through the day of August 9th and into the night. Every man understood the stakes now. The bodies washing ashore made it real. By 1300 hours on August 20th, 1942, they had improved the strip as much as humanly possible. Blake stood at the southern end, binoculars raised, scanning the sky. At 1416 hours, he saw them. 19. F-4F Wildcats in tight formation, approaching from the south. His mouth went dry. This was it. This was the moment. If the first plane crashed, if the runway failed, the entire operation collapsed. The lead Wildcat came in fast, dropping altitude rapidly. Blake watched through the binoculars, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold them steady. The fighter dropped toward the runway. Wheels touched coral. The plane bounced hard, slammed back down, bounced again. The right wing dipped. Blake stopped breathing. The pilot corrected, leveled out, and the Wildcat rolled safely down the strip. Blake exhaled. One down. The second Wildcat landed 30 seconds later, smoother, more controlled. Then the third, the fourth. One by one, all 19 Wildcats landed. 2 suffered minor damage. 1 pilot complained of severe vibration, but they were down. 12 minutes later, 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrived and landed successfully. Blake stood beside the runway as the last plane taxied to a stop. His legs felt weak. His hands were still shaking. Torres walked up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "We did it, Lieutenant. We actually did it." Blake nodded slowly. For 72 hours, they had worked without sleep, without rest, under constant threat of death. Private Costa had died building this strip. Sullivan had pushed himself to heat stroke and kept working. Torres had figured out Japanese machinery through pure desperation. And now, 31 American aircraft sat on Henderson Field, ready to fight. Blake allowed himself one moment of relief. Then he looked at the crude runway, the patched surface, the inadequate facilities. This was just the beginning. Holding this airfield, defending it, keeping it operational, that was going to be the real battle. And it was about to get much, much worse. September 1st, 1942. 14:30 hours. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Chief Machinist. Mate Henry Thompson stood on the beach watching 6 landing craft approach through the surf. He was 42 years old, a Navy machinist with 19 years of service, and he had volunteered for the newly formed Naval Construction Battalions because the recruiting poster said they would build airfields and bases in the Pacific. Building things. That sounded better than shooting people. Now, as his boots sank into the volcanic sand of Guadalcanal and he watched Marines dragging wounded men past him toward aid stations, Thompson wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The landing craft dropped their ramps and 600 Seabees of the 6th Naval Construction Battalion waded ashore. They were not young men. The average age was 37. Chief Petty Officer Frank Irvine was 52 years old, with 5 children back in Oregon. Machinist Matey Second Class Robert Chen was 41, with a wife and 3 daughters in San Francisco. These were carpenters, electricians, plumbers, heavy equipment operators, men who had built houses and bridges in civilian life, men with families, men who were too old for the draft but had volunteered anyway because someone had to build the bases that would win this war. Lieutenant Robert Blake met them at the beach. Thompson recognized him immediately from the engineering reports. Blake was the Marine officer who had somehow finished Henderson Field in 72 hours using captured Japanese equipment. He looked terrible, sunburned, exhausted, covered in coral dust, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look 40 instead of 24. Blake walked up to Commander Joseph Blunden, the 6th Seabees commanding officer. "Welcome to Guadalcanal, Commander. Your orders are to expand Henderson Field into a functional airbase. We need a second runway, proper taxiways, revetments for aircraft, fuel storage, maintenance facilities, everything." Blake paused. "And you need to do it while the Japanese try to kill you every single night." Blunden frowned. "Every night?" Blake nodded. Japanese warships shell the field almost nightly. Cruisers, destroyers, sometimes submarines. They wait until dark, approach to within 10 miles, and fire everything they have at this airfield. Then they leave before dawn. We lose men. We lose equipment. And every morning we repair the damage and start again. Blunden looked past Blake at Henderson Field. The single dirt runway stretched across the coastal plain, pocked with filled craters and rough patches. It looked barely functional. How many bombardments so far? Blake checked his notebook. 17 in the past 3 weeks. We have lost 22 Marines and 11 aircraft destroyed on the ground. Blunden felt something cold settle in his stomach. His men were builders, not soldiers. But apparently on Guadalcanal, there was no difference. The 6th Seabees unloaded their equipment over the next 6 hours. 12 bulldozers, 6 road graders, 8 dump trucks, 4 tractors, welding equipment, generators, enough spare parts and tools to build a small city. They established their camp 400 yards south of the runway, digging bomb shelters before they even pitched tents. The Marines had taught them that priorities on Guadalcanal were different. Shelter first, everything else later. Thompson spent his first evening on the island supervising the placement of construction equipment. The bulldozers were parked in a dispersed pattern, at least 50 yards between each machine, so a single bomb could not destroy multiple units. The fuel dumps were placed 200 yards from the runway and separated into small caches. Everything was designed to minimize losses during the inevitable attacks. By 2100 hours, Thompson had finished the equipment inventory and walked back to his shelter. The sun had set. Darkness covered the island. He lay down on his cot and tried to sleep. At 22:47 hours, Thompson heard it. A distant rumble, like thunder, coming from the ocean. Except it was not thunder. He sat up, listening. Other Seabees were stirring in nearby shelters. Someone whispered, "Is that them?" Thompson climbed out of his shelter and looked toward the water. He saw nothing, just blackness. But he heard it, a low, rhythmic pounding, growing louder. Ship engines, big ones. Multiple vessels approaching. Then he saw the first muzzle flash. A brilliant orange flash on the horizon, maybe 8 miles out. 5 seconds later, the shell hit 100 yards from the runway. The explosion lit up the night. Thompson ran. He sprinted toward the nearest bomb shelter, a reinforced dugout covered with coconut logs and sandbags. He dove through the entrance as more shells began hitting. The bombardment was methodical. The Japanese were walking their fire across the airfield in a grid pattern, systematically destroying everything. Each shell that hit near Thompson's shelter sent shock waves through the ground. Dirt rained from the ceiling. The coconut log supports groaned. 23 men huddled in that shelter, Seabees and Marines mixed together, listening to their deaths, searching for them in the darkness. The bombardment lasted 41 minutes. Japanese cruisers fired 328 rounds of 8-inch ammunition at Henderson Field. When the shelling stopped, Thompson lay in the shelter for 2 full minutes, waiting for his hearing to return. The ringing in his ears was so loud he could not hear anything else. Slowly, other sounds came back. Groaning, someone crying, fire crackling. Thompson crawled out into a changed world. Henderson Field was cratered. At least 30 new holes pocked the runway. One of the CB bulldozers was on fire, its fuel tank cooking off with sharp cracks. 2 Wildcats parked near the operations tent were burning, and there were bodies. Thompson counted 4 near the runway before he stopped counting. Commander Blunden found Thompson standing beside the burning bulldozer. How bad? Thompson looked at the destruction and did the math. We can repair this, 8 to 10 hours. We will need all operational dozers and every grader. Blunden checked his watch. 0328 hours. Marine pilots launch their morning patrol at 0630. That gives us 3 hours. Thompson stared at him. Sir, I said, 8 to 10 hours. Blunden looked him in the eye. I heard you, but we do not have 8 hours. We have 3. Make it work. Thompson organized repair teams as dawn broke across Guadalcanal. 5 bulldozers, 3 graders, 6 dump trucks, every piece of equipment that could move. The work was brutally simple. Push coral fill into the craters, compact it, grade it level, move to the next hole. The Seabees worked without breaks. No food, no water, just constant motion. By 06:20 hours, 5 minutes before the scheduled patrol launch, they had filled 28 craters and created a marginally usable runway. 6 Wildcats took off that morning. They bounced and lurched over the rough patches, but they got airborne. Thompson watched them climb away and felt a brief moment of pride. Then he went back to work. There were still 2 craters to fill before the next bombardment tonight. Because there would be another bombardment tonight. Thompson understood that now. This was the pattern. This was life on Guadalcanal. Work all day, shells at night, repair at dawn, repeat until you died or went insane or the war ended, whichever came first. September 14th, 23 and 18 hours. Thompson lay in his shelter, fully dressed, boots on, tools beside him. He had learned not to undress at night. When the shells started, there was no time to get ready. You ran or you died. He stared at the shelter ceiling, listening, waiting. The tension was worse than the bombardment itself. Knowing it was coming, knowing you could do nothing to stop it. Just wait and hope the shells hit somewhere else. At 23:41 hours, he heard the engines. Here we go again. The first shell hit at 23:43. Thompson pressed himself against the dirt wall of the shelter and began counting impacts. 1, 2, 3. He lost count at 47. This bombardment lasted 52 minutes. Destroyers this time, firing 5-inch guns. Smaller shells, but more of them. When it ended, Thompson crawled out and began organizing repairs. 4 hours until dawn. Get to work. September 19th, 22 and 56 hours. Thompson had stopped sleeping. He just lay in the shelter every night, waiting for the bombardment, then got up and worked. He had lost 11 pounds. His hands shook constantly from exhaustion. His ears rang even when there was no shelling. But he kept working because the alternative was unthinkable. If the Seabees stopped, Henderson Field closed. If Henderson Field closed, the Marines on Guadalcanal were abandoned. If Guadalcanal fell, the Japanese controlled the South Pacific. So, Thompson kept working. September 24th, 0147 hours. Cruisers. They fired for 63 minutes. Chief Petty Officer Frank Irvine, the 52-year-old with 5 children, was killed when a shell hit his shelter. Thompson found his body at dawn, most of him anyway. Thompson stood over the remains of his friend for 30 seconds. That was all the time he could spare. Then he went back to filling craters. October 1st, 2203 hours. Thompson lay in his shelter, listening to the approaching ships. He had developed a skill he never wanted. He could identify Japanese warships by the sound of their engines. Cruisers had a deeper rumble. Destroyers were higher pitched. Battleships, the few times they had come, made a sound like distant thunder that you felt in your chest before you heard it. Tonight was cruisers, probably 2 of them. Thompson closed his eyes and waited. The first shell hit at 2217 hours. By October 10th, The 6th Seabees had survived 31 naval bombardments. They had lost 38 men killed and 94 wounded. They had rebuilt Henderson Field 19 times. Seaman First Class Walter Kowalski, a 38-year-old equipment operator from Chicago, had been pushing dirt for 7 weeks straight. His dozer was machine number 3, the only one that had survived every bombardment without major damage. Kowalski treated that dozer like a living thing. He maintained it obsessively, changed filters daily, checked every bolt and hose. Because if his dozer died, he was just another rifleman. And Kowalski did not want to be a rifleman. October 13th, 23:15 hours. Thompson lay in his shelter and heard something different. The engine noise was wrong, too deep, too powerful. He sat up, suddenly terrified. Battleships. Battleships were coming. He had heard that sound only once before, weeks ago, and it had been distant. This was close, very close. Thompson looked at the other men in the shelter. Get deeper, dig into the walls, now. The men stared at him. Thompson screamed. Battleships, get down! They scrambled to press themselves into the dirt walls. At 2337 hours, the first salvo arrived. 14-inch naval guns fired from 8 miles offshore. The shells were not shells. They were freight trains falling from the sky. Thompson heard them coming, a sound like the world tearing apart, and then the first one hit. The explosion picked up the entire shelter and dropped it. The coconut log roof splintered. Dirt cascaded down. The pressure wave crushed Thompson's chest so hard he could not breathe. Someone was screaming. Multiple people were screaming. Thompson could not tell if one of them was him. The bombardment continued for 90 minutes. 2 Japanese battleships, the Congo and the Haruna, fired 9-18 shells of 14-inch ammunition at Henderson Field. Each shell weighed 1,400 pounds. Each explosion could destroy a city block. The mathematics of that much high explosive landing on a single square mile of Earth are beyond human comprehension. It was not war. It was apocalypse. Private Roy Anderson, a 19-year-old Marine who had been assigned to help the Seabees, started screaming in the shelter and could not stop. He screamed until his voice gave out, then kept screaming silently, his mouth open, no sound, his eyes wide and empty. Nobody stopped him. They were all too close to that edge themselves. At 0312 hours on October 14th, the shelling stopped. Thompson lay in the darkness, wondering if he was dead. His ears were not working. He could not feel his hands. He tasted blood. Slowly, sensation returned. Pain. His shoulder was dislocated. His nose was broken. He had bit through his lower lip at some point. Thompson crawled toward the shelter entrance. The opening was half collapsed. He dug through the dirt and pushed through into the outside world. Henderson Field was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The runway was a moonscape of overlapping craters. Some were 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep. Every building had been destroyed. Every tent had vanished. Fires burned everywhere. Aircraft were scattered in pieces across the field. And there were bodies, so many bodies. Thompson saw a leg lying beside a crater. Just a leg, boot still on. He kept walking. He found Kowalski standing beside dozer number 3. The machine had taken a near miss. Shrapnel had shredded the fuel tank and engine cowling. Kowalski was crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down his face, staring at his destroyed dozer. Thompson put a hand on his shoulder. We will fix it. Kowalski turned to look at him with empty eyes. Fix what? All of this? We cannot fix this. But they tried, because what else could they do? Commander Blunden found Thompson at 0345 hours. The commander looked like he had aged 20 years overnight. His uniform was shredded. Blood ran from his left ear. He spoke quietly, his voice hoarse from screaming. How many operational dozers? Thompson had already counted. 3. We lost 9. Blunden nodded slowly. Get those 3 running. Marine pilots launch at 0600. Thompson wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. Instead, he just nodded and walked toward the surviving equipment. 3 bulldozers. That was all they had. Thompson organized every surviving CB into fill crews. They worked like machines, shoveling, pushing, filling craters not to proper standards, not to engineering specifications, just filling them enough that aircraft wheels would not fall through. By 05:30 hours, they had created a path through the craters. Calling it a runway was generous. It was a dirt track through hell, but it was something. At 05:58 hours, Captain Joe Foss climbed into his F-4F Wildcat. He looked at the cratered strip and knew this takeoff would either make him or kill him. He pushed the throttle forward. The fighter bounced and lurched across the impossible surface, dropping into crater ramps, climbing out the other side, the landing gear screaming. At 95 miles per hour, Foss pulled back on the stick. The Wildcat lifted off with 200 feet of runway remaining. Foss climbed away from Henderson Field and keyed his radio. All Cactus aircraft, if you can get airborne from this strip, you can land on the moon. 19 fighters launched that morning. 2 aborted with collapsed landing gear. 17 made it into the air. Thompson stood beside the runway watching them go and felt something break inside him. They had done it again. Impossible repairs in impossible time with impossible resources. But at what cost? Thompson looked around at his men, hollow-eyed, shaking, covered in blood and dirt. How much longer could they keep this up? How many more nights before they all went insane like Anderson? How many more bombardments before the law of averages caught up and a shell hit the right shelter at the right time and killed them all? October 23rd, 1815 hours. Thompson sat on a pile of sandbags, staring at the ocean. The sun was setting. In a few hours, the Japanese would return. They always returned. He was so tired he could barely think. He had not really slept in 6 weeks. Just brief unconscious periods between bombardments. He heard footsteps and looked up. A young Marine pilot stood there. Thompson recognized him. Lieutenant Harold Bauer, one of the best pilots in the Cactus Air Force. 17 confirmed kills. Bauer sat down beside Thompson. Mind if I join you? Thompson shrugged. It is a free pile of sandbags. They sat in silence for a minute. Then Bauer spoke. I wanted to say thank you for what you do. Thompson did not understand. I push dirt around. Not exactly heroic. Bauer shook his head. You keep this field running. Every time I take off, I know somebody worked all night to fill the holes from the last bombardment. Every time I land, I know somebody is going to die tonight fixing the damage I just caused by landing. You do not get medals. You do not get recognition. But you are the reason we are still here. The reason the Japanese have not won. So, thank you. Thompson did not know what to say. He just nodded. Bauer stood up and walked back toward his fighter. 3 days later, Bauer was shot down over the Russell Islands and killed. They awarded him the Medal of Honor posthumously. October 26th, 1412 hours. Thompson supervised repairs after another bombardment. Cruisers, 600 rounds, 9 CBs killed, standard night. Kowalski was operating one of the 2 surviving dozers, pushing Phil into a crater when his blade hit something that should not be there. Wrong resistance, wrong feel. Kowalski stopped and climbed down. He walked to the front of the dozer. A human arm protruded from the dirt pile. just the arm from the elbow down, hand open, fingers slightly curled. Kowalski stared at it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he climbed back into his dozer and kept pushing. The arm disappeared into the crater fill. Kowalski never mentioned it. There was nothing to say. November 1st, 1942. Commander Blunden assembled the survivors. 2 months on Guadalcanal. 62 Seabees killed. 183 wounded. Henderson Field rebuilt 28 times. Every man standing before Blunden looked like a ghost. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, hands that shook constantly. Men who flinched at every loud noise. Men who would carry these 2 months for the rest of their lives, however long that lasted. Blunden spoke quietly. Higher command wants an operational readiness report. They want to know if we can continue maintaining Henderson Field. I am going to tell them yes, because if I say no, they evacuate us and this airfield closes. If this field closes, the Marines cannot hold Guadalcanal. If Guadalcanal falls, the Japanese control the South Pacific. So I am telling them yes. But I need to know, can you keep going? Nobody answered. Thompson looked at the other men, saw his own exhaustion reflected in every face, saw the fear, saw the resignation. They were all dead men. They just had not stopped moving yet. But stopping meant surrender, and none of them had survived this long, just to quit now. Thompson stepped forward. Sir, we keep going. One by one, the other Seabees nodded. Blunden looked at them with something like grief in his eyes. Then we keep going. The meeting dispersed. Another day ahead. Another bombardment tonight. Another round of repairs tomorrow. The war ground on, and the Seabees kept building. October 23rd, 1942. 2147 hours. Henderson Field perimeter, Guadalcanal. Chief Machinist Mate Henry Thompson crouched in a fighting hole on the southern edge of Henderson Field, gripping an M1 Garand rifle with hands that would not stop shaking. He was 42 years old. He was a machinist. He fixed engines and pumps and generators. He had never shot at another human being in his life. But 200 yards beyond the barbed wire perimeter, in the darkness that smelled like rotting vegetation and death, 5,600 Japanese soldiers were preparing to kill him, and there was nowhere to run. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Fuller had made the situation brutally clear at the briefing 2 hours ago. Fuller was short, stocky, and had a voice like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. He stood before 400 Marines and Seabees and spoke without notes. Intelligence confirms a major Japanese offensive tonight. 2 full regiments. Approximately 5,600 combat infantry supported by artillery and armor. Their mission is to take Henderson Field. Our mission is to stop them. Every man who can hold a rifle is now part of the defensive perimeter. Marines, Seabees, pilots, mechanics, cooks, all of you. You hold your ground or you die. There is no fallback position. There is no reserve. This is it. Questions? Nobody asked questions. What was there to ask? Thompson looked at the rifle in his lap. He had fired 40 rounds in basic training 3 months ago. That was his entire combat experience. The Marine sharing his fighting hole, Corporal Eddie Martinez, was 21 years old, with a thin scar running from his left eyebrow to his hairline. He had been killing Japanese soldiers since the August landing. Martinez glanced at Thompson and must have seen something in his face because he spoke quietly. First time? Thompson nodded. Martinez checked his own rifle, a practiced motion, then looked back. Safety here, selector here. Keep it on semi-auto. Do not try automatic fire or you will empty your clip in 3 seconds and hit nothing. Aim for center mass. Do not aim for the head. You will miss. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. And Chief? Thompson looked at him. Yeah? When it starts, your brain is going to scream at you to run. Everyone's brain does that. Ignore it. You run, you die tired. You stay, you maybe live. That is the only math that matters. At 2203 hours, the Japanese artillery started. Thompson heard the distant thump of guns firing, then the freight train sound of shells incoming. The first round hit 80 yards behind his position, throwing up a column of dirt and fire. The second hit the runway. The third hit near the fuel dumps. The bombardment was systematic, targeting Henderson Field's operational areas. Each explosion made Thompson flinch. After 15 minutes, he stopped flinching. His body had accepted that he might die and decided to stop wasting energy on fear. It was a strange feeling, peaceful almost. The artillery barrage stopped at 22:25 hours. The silence afterward was thick and wrong. Thompson raised his head above the edge of the fighting hole and stared into the jungle 200 yards away. Nothing, just darkness and the buzzing of insects that always filled the night air on Guadalcanal. Then Martinez grabbed his arm and whispered, "Listen." Thompson held his breath and listened. Voices, distant but distinct. Japanese voices shouting commands, building themselves up for the attack. The sound grew louder, closer. Thompson's hands tightened on the rifle until his knuckles went white. Martinez chambered around. The metallic click was impossibly loud. Here they come. At 22:37 hours, illumination flares burst overhead, turning night into harsh, flickering daylight. Thompson saw them. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers emerging from the jungle, running toward his position, rifles raised, bayonets fixed, screaming. Not words, just screaming. A sound designed to terrify. And it worked. Thompson's brain blanked. He could not think, could not process. There were too many of them. They were going to reach his position. They were going to kill him. He was going to die in a hole on an island he could not find on a map 6 months ago. Martinez started firing. The sharp crack of the M1 Garand beside Thompson's ear snapped him back. Martinez fired, worked the bolt, fired again, steady, controlled, professional. Japanese soldiers fell. More kept coming. Martinez turned his head and screamed, "Shoot! For God's sake, shoot!" Thompson raised his rifle. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel. He could see one Japanese soldier, young, maybe 20, running straight at him through the gap in the wire. The soldier's face was visible in the flare light. Scared. The soldier was scared too. Thompson put the front sight on the man's chest and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked. The soldier fell, tumbling forward, arms outstretched. Thompson stared. He had killed a man. He had just killed another human being. He could see the body lying 40 yards away, not moving. Thompson felt his stomach lurch. He leaned over the side of the fighting hole and vomited, bringing up his dinner in 3 violent heaves. Martinez grabbed his shoulder. "No time! Load!" Thompson wiped his mouth, grabbed another clip, fumbled it into the rifle with shaking hands, and fired again. This time, he did not aim at anyone specific. He just aimed at the mass of running figures and pulled the trigger as fast as his finger could move. The Japanese hit the barbed wire 50 yards from Thompson's position. American machine guns cut them down in clusters, bodies piling on top of bodies. But they kept coming. Some soldiers threw themselves onto the wire, their bodies creating bridges for others to cross. Others used Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps. A Japanese soldier made it through and ran directly at Thompson's hole, bayonet extended, face twisted in a war cry. Martinez shot him at 15 feet. The soldier's momentum carried him forward. He collapsed at the edge of the fighting hole, his hand falling across the sandbag lip, fingers twitching. Thompson stared at the hand. It was small, delicate, a young man's hand. The fingers stopped moving. The attack lasted 18 minutes. When it broke, when the surviving Japanese fell back into the jungle, Thompson sat in the bottom of his fighting hole and counted his remaining ammunition. 3 clips, 24 rounds. His hands were still shaking. The smell of gunpowder and blood was so thick he could taste it. Martinez was reloading methodically, checking his rifle for damage. "You did good, Chief. You held." Thompson wanted to laugh. Held what? He barely remembered firing. Martinez seemed to understand. "First time is always like that. Your brain shuts down. You just react. It gets easier." Thompson looked at him. "Does it?" Martinez paused, then shook his head slowly. "No, it gets different, not easier. You learn to function, but it never gets easier." At 23:18 hours, they came again. This time, Thompson was ready, or thought he was. The Japanese hit the perimeter in 3 places simultaneously, trying to overwhelm the defenders through coordination. Thompson fired until his rifle barrel was too hot to touch. Beside him, Martinez took a bullet through the right shoulder. The impact spun him sideways. He dropped his rifle. Thompson grabbed him before he fell. Martinez's face was white, blood pouring from the entrance wound just below his collarbone. His right arm hung useless. Thompson tried to apply pressure to the wound, but Martinez pushed him away with his left hand. "Keep shooting. I am fine. Keep shooting." Martinez picked up his rifle left-handed and kept firing. His shots were wild, uncontrolled, but he kept firing. At 00:52 hours, the second attack broke. Martinez was unconscious, leaning against the side of the fighting hole, his breathing shallow and rapid. Thompson tried to wake him. Nothing. He checked Martinez's pulse, weak but present. Thompson looked around desperately. Where were the corpsmen? He saw one 30 yards away, working on another Marine. Thompson waved. "Over here!" The corpsman looked, nodded, held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. Thompson nodded back. He checked Martinez's bandage. Still bleeding, but slower. Maybe he would make it. Thompson settled back into the fighting hole and waited for the third attack. While Thompson held the perimeter, Commander Joseph Blunden was 1 mile away, supervising the construction of Fighter Strip 1 under conditions that defied sanity. He had 140 Seabees working with 2 bulldozers, 1 grader, and hand tools. They were building a backup runway 1,500 yards east of Henderson Field, because if the Japanese overran the main strip tonight, the Marines needed somewhere aircraft could still land. Blunden had been ordered to complete the strip in 10 days. He had been working for 6 days when the Japanese attack started. Now he had maybe 36 hours before Henderson Field fell or held. The strip had to be finished. Had to be. Seaman First Class Danny Sullivan operated bulldozer number 7, pushing dirt and clearing jungle, while Japanese artillery fired randomly around him. Sullivan was 19 years old, from Boston, and he had been on Guadalcanal for 11 weeks. At 23:14 hours, he was grading the northern section of the new runway when a 75mm shell hit 30 yards away. Sullivan heard the incoming whistle, had time to think, "Oh no," then the world exploded. The blast wave hit the dozer like a physical force. Sullivan was thrown forward against the controls. Pain erupted in his left arm. He looked down. A piece of shrapnel, jagged and black, protruded from his bicep. Blood ran down his arm, soaking his sleeve, dripping onto the dozer controls. Sullivan stared at the metal embedded in his flesh. He could see the edges where it had torn through muscle. He could feel the heat of the wound. His first thought was, I am going to lose this arm. His second thought was, if I stop working, we all lose everything. Sullivan reached down with his right hand and grabbed the shrapnel. It was hot. The edges cut his palm. He took a breath, counted to 3, and pulled. The metal came out slowly, scraping against bone. Sullivan screamed. He could not help it. The pain was white-hot, all-consuming. The shrapnel came free. Blood poured from the wound more than before. Sullivan grabbed his belt, pulled it off with one hand and his teeth, and wrapped it around his upper arm, pulling it tight. The blood flow slowed, not stopped, just slowed, good enough. Sullivan put the dozer back in gear and kept working. His left arm hung useless at his side. He operated the dozer one-handed, using his knees to help with the controls. The pain was constant, throbbing, but he pushed it away. There would be time for pain later. Right now, there was work. The Japanese attacked the perimeter 5 times between 2200 hours on October 23rd and over 400 hours on October 24th. Thompson fought through all of them. He lost count of how many rounds he fired. His shoulder was bruised purple from the rifle's recoil. His hands were covered in powder burns. He had killed men, at least 8, probably more. He tried not to think about their faces, tried not to think about anything except loading and firing and staying alive. At 0412 hours, during the 5th attack, 3 Japanese soldiers broke through the American line 40 yards to Thompson's right. They were behind the defensive position, moving toward Henderson Field. If they reached the airfield, if they got to the parked aircraft or fuel dumps, they could cause catastrophic damage. Thompson saw them. Nobody else had. The Marines in positions nearby were focused forward, firing at the main assault. Thompson made a decision. He climbed out of his fighting hole and ran toward the 3 soldiers, firing as he moved. The first soldier went down. Thompson did not see where the bullet hit. The man just fell. The second soldier turned, raising his rifle. Thompson fired twice. The soldier collapsed. The third soldier was 10 feet away. He had a bayonet fixed to his rifle. Thompson pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The Japanese soldier lunged forward. Thompson tried to dodge, but his boots slipped on loose coral. The bayonet entered his left side just below the ribs. Thompson felt the blade punch through skin, muscle, felt it scrape against bone, felt it go deep, too deep, into soft tissue. The soldier twisted the rifle. Pain exploded through Thompson's body, white-hot, all-consuming. He could not breathe, could not think. His legs gave out. The Japanese soldier pulled the bayonet free. Thompson fell to his knees, his hands going to the wound. Blood poured between his fingers, hot and wet. So much blood. He could feel it running down his side, soaking his pants. The soldier raised his rifle to finish him. Thompson looked up at him. Young, maybe 18. Their eyes met. Then the soldier's head snapped back. He fell. Thompson turned and saw a Marine standing 20 feet away, rifle raised. The Marine lowered his weapon and ran toward Thompson. "You are hit. Stay down." The Marine grabbed Thompson under the arms and dragged him toward cover. Thompson tried to keep pressure on the wound, but his hands were slippery with blood. He could feel the hole in his side, could feel the edges of torn flesh. His vision was tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges. Cold spread through his body, not the heat of the wound, cold everywhere else. His teeth started chattering. The Marine was talking to him, but Thompson could not hear the words anymore. Everything sounded distant, muffled, like he was underwater. He looked up at the sky, stars visible between the palm trees. beautiful. He had not seen stars in weeks. Everything was too bright, then too dark, then nothing. Corpsman Miller found Thompson 3 minutes later, unconscious and pale, lying in a pool of his own blood. Miller checked the wound. Deep puncture, left side, approximately 4 inches. Possibly penetrated peritoneum. Life-threatening if not treated immediately. Miller applied pressure, wrapped the wound with field dressings, and called for stretcher bearers. Thompson was evacuated to the aid station at 0437 hours. The surgeon, Captain Robert Hammond, operated on him in a tent lit by kerosene lamps. The bayonet had missed Thompson's kidney by 2 inches and his intestines by 1 inch. Incredibly lucky. Hammond spent 40 minutes repairing internal damage, then stitched the wound closed with 37 sutures. Thompson survived. The battle for Henderson Field ended at 0600 hours on October 26th. The Japanese had lost over 3,000 men killed. The Americans lost 86 Marines and 17 Seabees dead, with 314 wounded. But the line held. Henderson Field remained in American hands. Fighter Strip 1, completed in 68 hours of desperate work under fire, was operational. Marine fighters landed on the new strip at 0730 hours, and pilots reported the surface was rough but adequate. Thompson woke up in a hospital tent 14 hours after surgery. His left side was bandaged and hurt worse than anything he had ever experienced. But he was alive. A nurse told him he had been incredibly lucky. 2 inches different, and the bayonet would have killed him. Thompson nodded. Lucky. That was one word for it. The nurse asked if he wanted morphine for the pain. Thompson said yes. She injected it, and the pain receded to a dull roar. Thompson closed his eyes and slept. Corporal Eddie Martinez died on October 24th at 1420 hours. The bullet that hit his shoulder had severed his subclavian artery. He lost too much blood before the corpsman could evacuate him. They buried him in the cemetery at Lunga Point, grave marker number 147. Thompson attended the funeral 3 weeks later, leaning on a cane, his wound still healing. He stood by the grave for 10 minutes after everyone else left. Martinez had been 21 years old. He had saved Thompson's life at least twice. Thompson could not remember his hometown, could not remember if Martinez had family. He did not even know Martinez's first name. Eddie, that was all. Eddie Martinez, 21 years old, buried on an island 8,000 miles from home. Thompson turned and walked away. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion served on Guadalcanal for 4 months total. They rebuilt Henderson Field 28 times. They completed Fighter Strip 1 in 68 hours. They built a 3rd runway, Bomber Strip 2, in November. They constructed 12 miles of roads, fuel storage for 400,000 gallons, maintenance facilities for 100 aircraft, housing for 15,000 men, and defensive fortifications that held against 5 major Japanese offensives. They lost 89 men killed and 267 wounded. Every survivor carried scars, some visible, most not. Years later, when historians wrote about Guadalcanal, they called it the turning point of the Pacific War, the place where American forces stopped the Japanese advance and began pushing back. At the center of that turning point was Henderson Field, an airfield built in 72 hours by Marines who did not know if they would survive the week. An airfield maintained and defended by Seabees who were supposed to be building bases, not fighting battles. Men in their 30s and 40s. Carpenters and plumbers and mechanics. Men with families. Men who volunteered to build things. But when the Japanese came, when everything depended on them holding a line they were never trained to hold, they picked up rifles and fought. Some died. Most survived. All of them did their job. The airfield never fell. The planes kept flying. And Guadalcanal stayed in American hands. That was all that mattered.